Number 1.
Jie Zhao was last seen in Honolulu, Hawaii on February 11, 1988. At the time she disappeared, Jie Zhao was selling Zippy's chili tickets door-to-door for a school fundraiser. She was selling these in her new Anu Avenue where she lived in an apartment at the time with her family. Jie Zhao promised her mother, Yan Ruin Lee, that she would be back by 6 p.m. Yan Ruin gave her daughter an adult-sized wristwatch, and Jie Zhao said she would time herself while she delivered the tickets. Jie Zhao never returned home and was never heard from again. Jie Zhao was last seen at some point between 4:30 p.m. and 4:45 p.m. She was seen in the vicinity of two 7-Eleven stores on Yuanu and Kuakini Street. This is just a few blocks away from her home at the time. She was approaching people who were going in and out of the store. She also did this as they got into or out of their cars. It's possible Jie Zhao got into a vehicle at this location. Other witness accounts place the child on the corner of South School Street and New Anu Avenue. There, she was observed speaking to a still unidentified individual. The individual is described as being a Caucasian male who was between 30 and 35 years of age in 1988. He was approximately 6 feet tall, and he had dark blonde hair which was combed back. He had a high forehead as well. This individual is considered a person of interest in the case. When Jie Zhao didn't return home that evening, her family began to search for her through the neighborhood. They called police, but they didn't begin searching until the following morning after her disappearance. Massive and extensive search efforts happened, but no trace of the child was ever found. Investigators are also looking for another man who Jie Zhao may have been seen with on the day of her disappearance and afterwards. The man is described as being dark-skinned who appeared to be in his 30s. His hair was pulled back into what appeared to be a red ponytail at the time. The man was driving an older model, yellow-colored Chevrolet. The car appeared to have been made between 1954 and 1957. The car had gray primer spots on it. It's possible Jie Zhao was seen getting into a vehicle like this on the day of her presumed abduction. Sketches of these two individuals have been created and distributed after her disappearance. On February 14, 1988, the man driving this car was seen at a Sunset Beach service station, the North Shore. He was in his vehicle at the time. Witnesses said they saw a child who matched Jie Zhao's description in the backseat. Investigators believe it's likely the child seen in the vehicle was in fact Jie Zhao. They are seeking these two men for questioning and continue to search for them. Investigators speculate that Jie Zhao was taken by a stranger. There was once alleged that Jie Zhao has been taken out of Hawaii and into the United States by airplane and was left in San Diego, California upon arrival. Investigators looked into the tip and someone was sent to locate her, but the lead went nowhere. Her family continues to hold out hope that they will find Jie Zhao alive and well. Yan Ruin has kept the same phone number all these years in hopes that her daughter will try to contact her someday. She actively continues to search for her and advocates for her return. In 1992, Yan Ruin became an official United States citizen. Back then in China, families were only allowed a single child, so since they already had an older daughter, Yan Ruin and her husband had to hide Jie Zhao and her younger sister until they moved to Hawaii. They emigrated to the United States in 1985. The family moved to Hawaii in 1987. At the time of her disappearance, Jie Zhao attended school in Royal Elementary School in Honolulu in 1988. Her presumed abduction remains unsolved, and the two men suspected in her case remain unidentified.
Number 2.
Barry was last seen in Phoenix, Arizona on April 30, 1974. He disappeared from his home near Cave Creek and Greenway Roads at some point during the night and has never been seen or heard from since. Gary was not reported missing when he initially disappeared in 1974. Gary was reported as missing on January 11, 1994, after his twin brother, Jerry, came forward to police and told them that their mother, Charlene Hose, killed Gary back in 1974. Investigators believe this as well, and so does Gary and Jerry's older brother, Guy. According to both of them, Guy and his two twin brothers were physically and brutally abused by their mother and stepfather, Walter Hose. Guy remembers that Walter did go crazy with a belt on them sometimes, but that it was Charlene who was responsible for any broken bones, severe beatings, and the hospitalizations. Guy says he was abused, but that he got a fraction what the twins got. The twins were abused more horrifically. Jerry was said to be the more passive twin, but Gary was defiant. As a result of his defiant attitude, Gary was often locked in a closet. On the night of his disappearance in April of 1974, Gary ran away from his home, but was brought back by police. Guy alleges that he awoke in the middle of the night to voices that came from the living room, and that he got up and saw Gary with his two parents in the living room. Guy says Gary was standing by Charlene and was covered in head to toes with bruises. He disappeared after that. Just days after Gary went missing, the family moved out of their home they lived in. They then moved to a trailer located on a 3-acre desert parcel on North Maple Street. This location was just outside of Maricopa County. They lived in that home for about a year until moving away. Charlene and Walter have never set foot on that property since moving away decades ago. For many years after his disappearance, Guy hoped that Gary was still alive and had been sent to live with a family in Texas who later adopted him. He no longer suspects this actually happened. The Hose family moved to Boise, Idaho. While in Idaho, Charlene continued to abuse Jerry and Guy until she was arrested for child abuse. A teacher at Eagle Elementary School, where Jerry attended school, noticed several marks on his face, legs, and his back. She was charged with felony abuse and was sentenced to 5 years probation. Jerry was removed from her and Walter Hose's care by Child Protective Services and was placed in foster care. Guy and the youngest boy in the family, Jeff, remained in their care, however. Jerry was later imprisoned for statutory rape. Guy believes Charlene beat Gary to death that night and that Walter helped her cover up the crime. He believes his brother's remains were buried somewhere on the 3-acre property they lived in after his disappearance. There was once a tip that Gary's body was buried behind the home they lived in with him and was concealed in cement. Searches uncovered nothing. Investigators also dug up a portion of the 3-acre property and utilized cadaver dogs in search of Gary's remains, but nothing was uncovered. News of the dig and the increased interest in Gary's case brought along new witnesses, which included a neighbor of the Hose family and a babysitter. They both recalled Charlene's abusive nature. The babysitter, Dora Wolf, remembers how Charlene used to abuse and beat Gary and his twin brother. Whenever Dora came to babysit, Charlene would instruct her to leave the twins locked in their bedroom and to not feed them or give them water. Dora would always disobey and feed them and give them water. She was unaware that Gary was missing until 2015. The former neighbor of the Hose family, Mary Fields, was also able to recall the abuse from Charlene. Mary often saved the boys from their cribs in their bedroom, which was said to be filled with feces. They were starved so often sometimes, the children would eat their own feces to live. They even called her grandmother sometimes. Mary remembers the boys' screams for help when Charlene was beating them. She describes Charlene as a cruel men's woman who was seriously mentally ill in 1974. She reportedly told Walter to get her the help she needed and had close calls with Charlene herself. Charlene once charged at Mary with a kitchen knife. Mary stated that on the night Gary went missing and was presumably killed, Walter Hose has a strange night himself. Walter reportedly came to her patio door and banged relentlessly on it, scaring her and her pet poodle. She was alone that night with her husband away at the hospital. He ran away before she had time to put on her robe. She believes Walter was there because he was going to confess something had happened to Gary that night. He often came for her whenever Charlene turned the violence into him. The family moved away just days after this. She remembers saying good riddance due to their troubling nature as a family. Mary at one point helped Guy Hose with a burnt hand. Charlene or Guy's hand through a furnace to teach him a lesson. She stated when tried to live the boys as much as she could to give them the life Charlene was denying them. Mary recalled that she often called the police and even the Arizona Department of Child Safety, but whether they investigated her claims or not, remains to be seen. Guy remains convinced that his brother's remains, and the key to solving his disappearance lies somewhere on the 3-acre property. He believes police did not search enough, and experts have also pointed out that only a sliver of that land was searched. Charlene and her husband made an oath that the property would remain untouched until both of them passed away. Charlene previously confessed that Gary's body would be found on that property during a lucid episode. Guy and his girlfriend, Michelle Monet, have a troubled relationship with the Maricopa County Sheriff's Office, who is investigating Gary's disappearance and presumed murder. Guy, Monet, and Jerry have each accused the police of neglecting to look for Gary and that she's shown Charlene more protection and service than Gary. The lead detective feels that Guy and his girlfriend have interfered with the investigation and that they have not allowed her to properly do her job. Guy eventually ordered a backhoe to dig up the septic tank and search for his brother's remains along with Monet. They were stopped by police. According to the property rights that Charlene still possessed, Guy and Jerry were not permitted to be on that property. Guy and Monet would have been arrested, but the lead detective did not have any action over the property, so they were instead asked to leave. It's unknown if another search will ever be done on the property. Charlene was going to pass the property down to Jeff, Guy, and Jerry describes him as being her favorite. Charlene passed away on October 29, 2016. She had multiple health problems prior to her death. Walter Hose passed away from lung cancer in February of 2014. Neither of them were ever questioned by police nor charged with Gary's murder. At the time of his disappearance, Gary was a kindergarten student at Campo Bello School, along with Jerry. His disappearance remains unsolved and foul play is suspected. His family hopes to locate him and give him a proper burial.
Number 3.
Prentice was last seen in Woodville, Mississippi on May 10, 1992. She was accompanied by a younger friend, Lemoyne Allen, at the time. They were last seen playing in front of a rural grocery store known as the Jimmy Jackson Grocery Store. The store was located on Highway 24 just 4 miles east of Woodville. They were there with up to 20 other people. The children were both known to be playing with some older kids before they went missing, until these older children asked them to leave them alone. Lemoyne and Krennis were last seen at 4 p.m. A female witness reported she drove by Highway 24 and saw the children near the road at the time. This is the last confirmed sighting of them. They both disappeared at some point afterwards and were never seen again. Despite extensive searching by both law enforcement and federal investigators, no trace of either Krennis or Lemoyne have ever been found. Wooded areas and waterways were searched with no result. Investigators speculate that both children were abducted by a stranger, but have no firm suspects in the case. Family members were interviewed but are not suspected of any involvement in the case. An unknown blue compact car with a false convertible top, chrome hubcaps, and dark-tinted windows was seen in the area when the children came up missing. Investigators are not sure if the vehicle is connected to children's case in any way. At the time of their disappearance, Lemoyne was with relatives that he lived with in Edgar, Louisiana in 1992. Krennis was there with her father, who was separated from her mother at the time. The children remain missing and their case unsolved.
Number 4.
Jennifer was last seen in Brockton, Massachusetts on November 14, 1989. During that day, her mother, Dottie McLean, asked Jennifer to watch her younger brother and sister for a few hours at their home in the Emerson Avenue apartments. Jennifer did protest this, but her mother was firm with her about it. Jennifer has watched her siblings numerous times before without any issues whatsoever. Jennifer is said to have had different plans to do that night. She wanted to hang out with her neighborhood friends, so she called her cousin, Tammy Young, who lived just around the corner, to come and watch her siblings while she went out. Her younger sister, Yvette Aubin, continuously told Jennifer not to go. When her cousin arrived to the home, Jennifer left. Tammy came to house at 10 p.m. Jennifer left the residence immediately after her cousin arrived. Jennifer returned to the residence for a short period of time, so she could get a light jacket. She seemed to be in good spirits during the night. After Jennifer left her home, she initially went to a female friend's house near her own home, but that friend was not at the house, and her friend's mother refused to let her inside of the home. The mother would later state that Jennifer smelled of liquor and appeared to be slightly intoxicated. Jennifer left the house accompanied by an older teenage male friend. They both went to a local convenience store located at the end of Jennifer's street and was reportedly a minute's walk away from her home. Jennifer went inside of the store, but her friend didn't, and he went home because he didn't feel well. He left while Jennifer was still inside. This is one of the last confirmed sightings of her. Dottie said she became concerned for her daughter when she called the home, only to be met by the voice of Jennifer's cousin. She felt something was wrong and decided to go home, but Jennifer was not there. A missing persons report was filed on Jennifer the next morning. However, investigators considered Jennifer as a runaway, and no investigative action occurred. Dottie and Yvette attempted to speak with Jennifer's friends, but they refused to say anything. It wasn't until 1992 that detective began asking about Jennifer. Her case barely got any media exposure until about 1999. By then, 10 long years had passed without any trace of Jennifer being found. In the early 2000s, investigators got a tip that Jennifer was possibly alive and living in Corpus Christi, Texas. The woman appeared to have no verifiable background before the time Jennifer went missing. She physically resembled Jennifer and the age-enhanced photos that were created of her. However, it was soon discovered this woman was not Jennifer. Investigators now believe Jennifer was abducted soon after her disappearance and was probably murdered. They continue to search for her remains. A teenage boy came forward and stated he saw Jennifer in Broad Place, which was a small alley off Broad Street in Brockton. The witness told investigators he was drunk at the time he saw Jennifer and got sick in the bushes. He stated he saw Jennifer speaking with someone who drove a brown pickup truck. It's possible there were 2 individuals in the truck at the time. Jennifer was seen approaching the passenger side of the vehicle. This is the final sighting of Jennifer alive. The investigators were able to account for 2 trucks that belonged to young people in that area. One of the pickup trucks is unaccounted for as it disappeared shortly after Jennifer did. Investigators have said there's no reason for it to have gone missing as it was only a few years old. It was never sold or re-registered. Investigators believe Jennifer's friends from that time know what happened to her, but are keeping it silent. Investigators hope one of them will help solve her case. It's likely Jennifer was taken by someone she trusted, as she was trusting with everyone. Investigators have stated they know the individuals who were involved in Jennifer's presumed abduction, but they cannot charge anyone with any crime because Jennifer's body hasn't been found. They have stated these individuals are still in the local area. It's believed Jennifer was killed and buried on private property in the Brockton area. Searches for her remains have revealed no trace as to her whereabouts. There was once a tip in 2003 that Jennifer was killed and her body placed in the cab of a truck. The truck was driven into a pond and sunk just outside of Brockton, minutes away from her home. The pond was searched but nothing was found. At the time of her disappearance, Jennifer was described as being very social and happy with her life at the time of her 1989 disappearance. Jennifer wasn't troublesome, but was somewhat rebellious at the time she went missing. She has previously run away from home, but never stayed away for long periods of time. Her case remains unsolved and foul play is suspected.
Number 5.
Zachary was last seen in Great Falls, Montana on February 6, 1996. He left his residence he shared with his mother, Rachel Howard, which was located in the 400 block of North 4th Street, at approximately 7:34 a.m. He was walking to school at the time. Witnesses reportedly saw him walk down the alley located near the 400 block of North 5th Street shortly afterwards. He never arrived at school that morning. Zachary has never been seen or heard from again. School officials called Rachel to inform her that her son was marked as absent and had not shown up for classes that day. She filed a missing persons report on Zachary later in the afternoon. Searches failed to find any trace of the child. Investigators do not believe Zachary left on his own accord. He previously ran away once about a month before his 1996 disappearance. He called his mother within an hour to come and get him. Investigators believe Zachary was abducted while he walked to school that morning. A family of 3 reported seeing Zachary walking down the alley. They also recalled how an off-white 4-door car neatly run him over. Other witnesses saw Ramsey standing in the alleyway as if he were waiting for someone. Witnesses placed a man known as Nathaniel Bar-Jonah standing beside a dumpster in the alley at approximately 7:15 a.m. Bar-Jonah appeared to be taking out the trash and was wearing a blue police-like jacket. When Zachary entered the alley later on, Nathaniel was still observed standing next to that dumpster. At 7:45 a.m., a witness saw Zachary cross North 6th Street. He appeared to be crying and in distress. Zachary was seen being followed by an older obese man who was a few feet behind him and appeared to be upset. Police believe the man seen following the boy was Nathaniel Bar-Jonah and that he abducted Zachary by subduing him with a stun gun soon afterwards. Investigators immediately suspected Bar-Jonah, who seemingly left behind a trail of child sexual assault and murders wherever he went. Bar-Jonah is also a possible suspect in the 1973 Connecticut abduction of Janice Bockett, the 1978 Massachusetts disappearance of Andrew Amato, and the 1997 Wyoming disappearance of Amanda Gallion. Investigators have considered his involvement in Amanda Gallion because she was often mistaken for a boy while riding her bicycle. Nathaniel would have been 16 years of age when Janice disappeared, but he had already strangled a former playmate by that time. He also served a prison sentence for the abduction and attempted murder of 2 boys from Massachusetts in 1977. He was also found guilty of 2 counts of child molestation in Montana in 2002. Investigators also believe Bar-Jonah was involved in cannibalism. Human hair was found in a meat grinder at his home. It did not belong to any of his possible missing victims. The reason why investigators have questioned his possible involvement in Janice's apparent abduction was since he grew up and lived in Webster, Massachusetts at the time. Webster is only 20 miles away from Toland. In December of 2001, a handwritten list by Bar-Jonah surfaced. It was titled Lake Webster, and it included the names of multiple alleged victims of Bar-Jonah. Some news reports have falsely claimed that Andrew Amato was among the children on the list, but he wasn't, and there's no evidence suggesting he was involved in that case. In the 1970s, Bar-Jonah's given name was David P. Brown. It should be emphasized that Bar-Jonah has not been formally implicated in these other cases. Investigators in Zachary's case have uncovered a lot of circumstantial evidence that Nathaniel was involved in his abduction. He had access to his mother's off-white 4-door 1978 Toyota Corolla on the day of Zachary's disappearance, since his mother and brother were out of town for a funeral. It was also discovered that he did not report to work on the day of his disappearance or the days preceding. Nathaniel's home was also searched, and inside, they found a list of boys' names. This list included the names of his previous victims, and one of them was Zachary Ramsey, which was followed by the word died. They also found he had dozens of newspaper clippings that covered the Ramsey case. The former roommate of Bar-Jonah described how he found clothing inside of the apartment that appeared to match the clothing that Zachary was wearing on the morning of his presumed abduction, as well as a pair of bloody gloves. Another roommate and others who spoke with Bar-Jonah recalled how he would spontaneously bring up Zachary in conversations. In addition to the list, investigators also found notebooks in the apartment. With the help of the FBI, the notebooks were decoded and were found to contain descriptions of torturing and eating children. There were also macabre recipes that involved children's body parts. Investigators also sprayed his garage with phosphorus to see if there was any evidence in relation to the Ramsey case. When the spraying occurred, investigators found the word Tita appeared. This has implied Nathaniel's possible involvement in the 1973 abduction and murder of James Teta. He was kidnapped from Massachusetts on August 23, 1973. His body was found on August 25 in Rindge, New Hampshire. He was raped and strangled to death. He was arrested in 1999 and was charged with impersonation of a police officer. After searching his home, investigators uncovered various pictures of young children cut out of magazines and a bone that was identified as belonging to an unknown young male child. Montana police charged Bar Jonah with kidnapping, sexual assault, and kidnapping and sexual assault of 3 other boys. Nathaniel was tried for the abduction and molestation of 3 boys, and convicted of kidnapping, aggravated assault, and sexual assault, including charges that he had tortured one of the boys and hung him from the ceiling. During Bar Jonah's trial, a 36-year-old woman, Mary Patron, recognized him as the man who had abducted and assaulted her by posing as a police officer in 1974. However, the statutes of limitations had expired in that case, therefore he could not be held accountable for that crime. Nathaniel was sentenced to 130 years in prison. Bar Jonah died of a blood clot in Montenaperson in 2008. In 2000, he was originally charged with kidnapping and killing Zachary, but the charge against him were dropped in October of 2002 due to lack of evidence. Rachel Howard also believed her son was still alive and reportedly viewed a videotape of her son playing in a playground in 2000. Investigators were able to trace the film to Italy, where the child's father was stationed in the military at the time. The boy's dental records and fingerprints didn't match with Zachary's, however, so they are not the same person. Rachel continues to believe her son is alive. She has stated her psychic and others believe Zachary is still out there. Investigators closed the investigation into Zachary's disappearance after they were able to link Bar Jonah to his disappearance. Howard has emphasized the possibility that police might be wrong about Nathaniel being involved in the case, since they have previously done this in the Ramsey case. They initially presumed that she was concealing her son. In January of 2011, Zachary's father, Franz Ramsey, had the boy legally declared dead, despite his ex-wife's objection towards that idea. He was able to collect a $20,000 life insurance policy on Zachary. His mother continues to keep faith she'll see her son again one day. At the time of his disappearance, Zachary was a student at Witter School and enjoyed pairing and drawing. He is described as a reserved but rather friendly child. He was afraid of the dark at the time. His parents had been divorced since before he turned 2 years old. Zachary's case remains unsolved.